Hello, my name is Dr. Kellyn Lee, and I am a Chartered Psychologist and I work in the area of dementia care. I'm a BPS Chartered Psychologist and the founder of Wiser Health and Social Care. So Wiser Health and Social Care is an organisation, a company that bring training to care organisations, evidence-based training that I conducted in my academic career that spanned sort of over a decade. I'm also the founder of the Dementia Care Hub, which is a community-based company which supports people that are living with dementia in their own homes. So today the presentation is Material Citizenship, a new approach to dementia care. And as I said, this came out of my academic work. So this was actually a concept that was developed in my PhD. And what I wanted to understand was, why is it in a lot of care home settings, when you go in there, it kind of feels like people are waiting for something to happen to them. There isn't kind of the hustle and bustle or the things that are going on in a normal home. And you could say, well, it isn't a normal home, Kellyn. But I could also argue the fact that if these are supposed to be somebody's home, you would expect people to be treating them like home. So you would expect them to be interacting with their environment. So what Material Citizenship does is it looked at the routines that we have every day, the stuff that we do that make us who we are. And I focused on objects. So I focused on objects as a way of being a tangible thing that we could look at. So what objects do people take into care homes? Who makes the decisions about those objects? And equally, who uses them? Okay. So what I was really doing was focusing on balancing the physical and psychological risks. So we do very well at looking at physical risk when we're talking about care, but not so well in relation to the psychological risks. And I do this with a view to increase the well-being, not only of the people that are living in care homes, but also people that work in them, and also reduce what I call avoidable distress reactions. So these are distress reactions that are caused by the environment or potentially the people within that environment, rather than dementia itself. So what I would like you to do just for a moment is I'd like you to think about when you woke up this morning. Okay, so when you woke up, you went to get a shower and the shower gel that you would typically use wasn't there. It didn't have your smell. It was different. There's no hairdryer to dry your hair. The clothing you planned to wear today is gone. It's disappeared. You don't know where it is. Okay. You've no access to a kettle, so you can't make that cup of tea or that cup of coffee that you might like first thing in the morning. You want to talk to somebody on your mobile phone, but you haven't got this either. So you can't contact anybody to find out what is it that's going on here. Why does nothing feel quite right? And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to think about, how is your day going? How do you feel? Okay, and that's the lives of many people living with a dementia in a care home. So if we look at objects, what we tend to do is we tend to focus on relationships as being person-person relationships. Okay, so it's the people that are in our lives that make it, what we need it to be. And I'm not saying that that isn't a part of it. Of course it is. But we also have relationships with objects. So a certain coffee cup that you use, a certain phone that you might have, I choose those. Okay, they fit with my identity. And this was something that Danny Miller said, who's an anthropologist at UCL in London. We live today in a world of ever more stuff, what sometimes seems a deluge of goods and shopping. We tend to assume that this has two results, that we are more superficial and that we are more materialistic. Our relationships to things come in at the expense of our relationships to people. But in many ways, the opposite is true. That possessions often remain profound, and usually the closer our relationships are with objects, the closer our relationships are with people. And I want to give you an example of this. Okay, so hopefully everyone knows what this is, but if you don't, it's a flask. And what it does is it holds hot or cold drinks. Okay, so drinks that you can access. You tend to take the top off, you can use that as a cup, and then you can pour your drink. So as a practicing therapist, I had somebody that would come to me because she was really struggling with the move her mum had made to a care home. Okay, it had changed their relationship and neither were managing this particularly well. So she would come to me and we would have conversations, and she would say, you know, she used to visit mum in the care home 3 to 4 times a week and often felt worse for going. She really didn't feel much better about going to see mum. And this was really hard for her because they'd always had a really close relationship. They'd always spent time together. She would always go round to her mum's house and her mum would host her. Okay, so on this one occasion, she came in and she said, we had a great visit this week, Kellyn. I said, right, okay, so what was it about the visit that was different this time? She said, I don't know. I said, well, can you think of any changes? And she said, well, I did take in a flask. So I said, right, okay, so what was it? You know, did your mum used to use a flask? Did she used to go camping? You know, trying to kind of think of ways of which, you know, what was it that this object held for her mum? And she said, no, I don't ever remember her using one. And I said, right, okay, well, if this was a positive thing, would you consider buying your mum a flask to have in the care home? And she said, no, what would be the point? She's got dementia. She'd forget to drink the tea. And I said, well, actually, perhaps it's less about the dementia, not less about the drinking of the tea, and more about at that moment in time, she could host you. She could be mum. You're coming into her space. She doesn't have to wait for care home staff to come around and offer you tea on her behalf. She can give you the tea. She can choose when, she can choose how, and she can host you. She can be mum and you can be daughter. That brought your relationship back together again. So if we think about what Danny Miller was saying here in relation to the closer our relationships are with objects, the closer our relationships are with people, what I'm saying here is that this flask actually gave them something that had been absent ever since mum moved in the care home. Mum could be mum, Jane could be Jane. They could come together and they could continue a relationship that they were used to having. Okay, so it's really important to think about what these objects can do, what they can facilitate. So when I did my research, looking at the personal possessions that people have in care homes, what I found was that it was widely believed by care home staff that people could bring in anything they wanted to. In fact, they were encouraged to bring in their own possessions. However, once I started asking, well, could I bring in my hair straighteners? Oh, well, no, you couldn't have those. Why? Because you might burn yourself. Right, okay. Could I bring in my hairdryer? Oh, no, you couldn't have that. Why? Because you might leave it in the sink. It could cause a fire. Somebody else might come into your room. Okay. And anyway, we've got a hairdresser on site. So when you go and see them every 2 weeks, you can have your hair done then. Okay. So actually, when we started looking at the objects that people were encouraged to bring in, the list was very small. It was, photographs, it was clothing, it was toiletries. It tended to be things out of necessity or things that made the room look a little bit more familiar, but not things that people necessarily interacted with on a daily basis that continued the routines and rituals they'd had over a lifetime. I also found that people living with dementia were not included in decision-making about their possessions. Many people would move from a hospital admission and go straight into a care home, never returning home and never being part of that decision-making process of where to live or how they were going to transport their belongings into that place. There was a lack of control over personal possessions. So often when somebody had moved into the care home, their families tended to deal with all of this stuff. And that was really difficult for families too. This wasn't easy for anybody, okay? But they had no control over what happened to their possessions. So that their whole life is in this property and they have no idea what's happening to it. They have no control over it. They can possibly ask family to bring certain things in, but actually then that was decided between the families and the care homes as to what could and couldn't be brought in. They also didn't have much control over buying new possessions because generally people would have taken over the money side of things, but equally they didn't have the opportunity to just go out and buy things or to be able to buy things online or to do anything like that. There were no opportunities to return home. So once somebody had moved into a care home, I found that they didn't have the opportunity to go home. They couldn't go home and sort out their belongings, And when you think about this from a rights perspective, one, we have the right to choose where we live, and two, we have the right to our own, to enjoy our property. In fact, these rights aren't being applied to people living with dementia. They had no opportunity to return home because care staff were frightened that because they didn't make those decisions, because their rights hadn't been upheld, that actually if they took them home, there might be the risk that that person wouldn't want to come back to the care home. And then what would they do? How would they solve that problem? It was just too much. So do you know what? We just won't do it. You can kind of understand why, but even so, you know, it shouldn't happen. Care staff viewed objects as a risk. So if you put a person with dementia and an object in the same room, the elaborate stories that came out were, you know, they were quite something, you know, oh, if you gave somebody, you know, a knife to open up their mouth with, oh, that will be in somebody by the end of the week. Oh, okay, so has that person got a history of violence? No. Has that ever happened in here? No. So a lot of this stuff was based on someone somewhere had done something at some time, so therefore nobody can have it. There was also, when I was there, an email that came out saying that somebody in one of the care homes of a group had eaten some non-edible cream. So an email came out to say all creams need to go away. They all need to be locked away, and only people could use them if they were supervised by a member of staff. So people that could use their own creams were having them removed from them because someone somewhere had done something, and therefore that was a risk. So this is what I'm talking about in relation to balancing the psychological and physical risks. We're in a position, particularly in regulated care, where it's gone too far. As far as I'm concerned, you know, the risk of harm can actually have a huge detrimental impact on the psychological well-being of people that are living in care homes. You know, disempowering, you know, no control, no choice. You know, who would want that? There was also a lack of guidance in policy and practice documents. Okay, so there were things like, you know, in one practice document, I saw something that said, you know, families, could they please bring in clothing for people that was a size too big for the person, because then it was easier for staff to get on and off. I wouldn't like clothing that's a size too big for me. One, it might not feel comfortable, and two, I might not like the size that they've given me. So, you know, there's no real consideration. There's no real value and importance that are placed on these items. And in policy documents, there was, I think it was the Care Act, or some, you know, sort of governmental document that said only mentioned objects when somebody was at end of life. So if somebody was near death, then they should have their belongings around them. But it wasn't mentioned up until that point. So kind of like, well, what about when somebody's still, you know, living their life and wanting to you know, to enjoy their existence? So I developed Material Citizenship, and I did this because when I was interviewing staff in care homes, you know, using my psychological background, I was kind of getting them to really kind of think about how they would feel. You know, what objects are important to you? What things would you really not want to be without? What sort of problems would it cause you? Okay, and they were really, you know, those light bulb moments where staff said, oh, I wouldn't like that. Okay, so would you want to live here? No, I wouldn't. Okay, and then all of a sudden I started to see practices changing from those people that had experienced that sense of, I wouldn't want that to happen to me, so therefore I need to make a change. So material citizenship, the definition that I gave it is the right to be included in decision making relating to personal possessions, and the right to have opportunities to use functional objects to perform everyday tasks. Okay, and when I'm talking about functional objects, what I'm talking about are, my definition is any inanimate item which a person can use to perform a task, not necessarily to completion or to any perceived standard, which maintains or supports the cultivation of his or her identities. So when I'm talking about the cultivation of identity, you know, it can change over time. So it's also important to look at what objects are important and when. Okay, but also they're not necessarily to completion or to any perceived standard. So just because I can't, or just because I don't finish something doesn't mean I shouldn't start it. Okay, and also to any perceived standard. Well, whose standard is this? If I like my room to be quite messy, that's how I would like it to be. It doesn't mean that it's wrong, or, you know, so just because I don't do something to your standard doesn't mean that I shouldn't do that at all. So when I'm talking about functional objects, you know, I've got the flask there. I've given you an example of what that did for a mum and her daughter. You know, a Hoover, there are lots of people that would do these ordinary tasks, you know, that we all do every day that make us who we are. We don't just have organised fun. You know, we are more than that. There are lots and lots of things that we do each day that make our day run smoothly, which really importantly make us feel psychologically safe. You know, it's not so much on the cognitive, like, I know what I do, I know what I do it with, I know where those things are. And you'll see how this affects the narrative of dementia, okay? So what I'm arguing is that the reason functional objects are important in care is because we are what we have. They are part of who we are. We can demonstrate who we are by the things that we have and how we use them. Because we don't just have things, we use things. So yeah, there may be things, there's pictures on my wall there. You know, I've chosen them, I like those. I might not actually take them off the wall and physically use them, but there are also other things, you know, as I said, the coffee cup that I use that. That's what I like to drink out of. So I'm much more likely to drink more. And also by having these things, it keeps our routines, and that's what keeps us psychologically safe. So what does material citizenship do? It supports the identity of the person, past, present, and future. Okay, so when we're talking about dementia, sometimes what we can do is we can focus too much on the past, but actually, how does that person want to live today, and what things do we use in order to bring that in? It reduces distress reactions, and I'm going to go on to this in the next slide, really talking about what can happen with the absence of these items. It also makes care tangible. Okay, so when we talk about person-centered care or relationship-centered care, what I often see is I can hear people articulating very clearly what it is, and then I see a gap because what I'm not seeing is that in practice. And what I'm arguing is that objects can make that care tangible. So if somebody has the items that they want to have, I can tell that they've been included in decision-making. Okay, if somebody is using the objects that they want to use, I can see that this care practice is empowering and supportive of that person's identity. So by having those objects, I can actually make it quite an objective measurement rather than a subjective experience, even though it's both. It provides evidence of true person-centered care, as I've just said, and it inspires staff. And this was one of the most important things, because if we are going to provide high quality dementia care, we need to have a workforce that feel valued, that feel invested in, that are inspired to want to do more, because they do an amazing job in really difficult circumstances. So, you know, what we found was that by delivering material citizenship to them, although some of them were already doing it, they didn't have a name for it, they didn't have a language, and therefore you didn't see it in care plans, you didn't see it in daily records, okay? Because there wasn't the language to use. So by giving this a language, by giving it a name, material citizenship, staff were saying, well, I can do it. One, it confirms that what I was doing was right in the first place. And two, it's an evidence-based program. So therefore, we can show that this is what we need to do and the reasons why we're doing it. So the absence of personal possessions, what I argue is it perpetuates a negative narrative of dementia. So when I've delivered material citizenship training and worked in care homes, I worked in a care home many, many years ago when I was probably from about the age of 19 to 23, 22. So I know I have that experience of working in care as well, and the difficulties that care staff face and the complexity of it. But what I've seen a lot of is this sense of people living with dementia will become aggressive. People living with dementia, you know, have these challenging behaviours. And my argument is that you need to look at the environment and the people in it and the experience of that. And actually, if that would be a normal reaction for you, then that can't be a symptom of dementia. And we tend to over pathologise dementia. So, you know, we kind of go, right, top tips of challenging behaviour. Okay, but what's going on for that person? Okay, so if I was going to move into a care home, so this new environment that I haven't lived before, it's not my home. There's a load of people in here that I don't know. And there's all these different routines that people are expecting me to understand and do, okay, without always necessarily telling me clearly. So I may be confused, okay, oh, but that's a symptom of dementia. Okay, but is it? Because if I'm in this new environment and I haven't got any of those objects around me that I need to make my day run smoothly, as I pointed out in scenario one, yes, that's going to lead to confusion. And if that's going to lead to confusion for me as somebody who doesn't have a dementia, then that's a normal response to the environment. So we can then say, potentially, that is not a symptom of dementia. Increase agitation. I'm looking for my stuff. I don't know where it is. Somebody, can you please tell me? You know, that kind of agitation in relation to I don't know where my things are. I want to go home. I don't want to stay here. This doesn't feel like home. Well, actually, if we look at it from a material citizenship perspective, we could also potentially suggest that we could reduce this distress reaction if we enable somebody to live the life that they want to, using the objects that they want to use. There's also a lack of control and choice, as I pointed out with the flask. You know, I have to wait for somebody to come around to bring the tea, to bring the coffee, that kind of stuff. I lack choice and control over what I do each day, about how I do things. You know, how disempowering. You know, and that's why we can kind of see people going into a care home, their mental health takes a real dip. Because if we have no choice and control over our lives, if we can't do the things that we've always done, that's a really negative experience. And if that is prolonged, it will have an impact on our mental health. There's an increased dependency on care staff because I haven't got the things I need to do the things I need to do. I have to wait for you to do them for me or bring them to me. So actually, it creates more work. Loss of identity. I don't know who I am. I've now become a resident. Who am I? What do I do? What do I like? You know, but also one of the major things is feeling unsafe. And when people have a dementia, there is a lot of, you know, feelings of unsafe because, you know, and this is where you find, you know, people, you know, will sort of, you know, want to stay close to those that they love. They want to stay close to their partner. They don't want to be parted because you're my safe place. You know, my home is my safe space, okay? Because the brain isn't working as it used to. There are things that are going on in my brain that aren't making sense to me, okay? So this doesn't make me feel psychologically safe. However, if we can keep those routines going and those rituals going, we can look and work towards making people feel more safe. So when you've got somebody who keeps packing their bags and saying, I want to leave, I don't want to stay here. Well, one, it could be actually that they don't want to stay here and they do want to leave. But it could also be the underlying factor is I don't feel safe here. It doesn't feel like home. And why doesn't it feel like home? Because I can't behave in it the way that I would, you know, at home. I can't interact with things the way that I do. I'm asked to spend time in communal spaces that don't even look like my own space at home. And yet the room that's down the corridor that's got all my things in it, I'm expected to spend the least amount of time in. So what I want to do now is to give you some idea of the impact that material citizenship has had in practice. So this is stuff that has come out of, you know, delivering material citizenship training to care home staff. And when we look at care home staff, we are talking about all staff. We're talking about a whole home approach, not just care staff. The domestic staff have so much knowledge about people that live in care homes, okay? And equally, they're using a lot of these items that people may well want to use. So it's very important. Hospitality, you know, everybody, the people that are in the office, on reception, everybody needs to have this training, okay? So this was one that came up. So the blue chair, and you kind of go, well, what difference would a blue chair make to somebody's life? How could it transform the care that they are receiving? Well, this did. So the situation was a woman had recently moved into the care home. She was refusing to leave her room. So the room that she had been given, she was refusing to leave. And also she didn't want care staff in her room. The relationship had become really difficult between staff and this woman. And the dementia care manager was at the point where she said to me, she said, you know, I think we need to move her on because I just don't see what we can do with her. I think she needs different care to what we can deliver. After attending the material citizenship training, the action that was taken was that, you know, one of the members of staff was kind of, you know, developing a relationship with her, a better one. And they talked about material citizenship, and the woman said that there was this blue chair that she wanted bringing in from home. And luckily, it was still at home and they could bring it in for her. So she enjoyed this chair as it reminded her of her husband. And although her husband had passed away, it still seemed to give her that sort of comfort and that sense of identity and that sense of being. Once she had the blue chair, she then started allowing staff into her room, and relationships became much more positive. Okay. So she also, the dementia care manager, after I saw, because I see them at different times, so the training's delivered in 2 intervals, but also I saw her at a dementia care congress, and she said, I can't believe, she said, I can't tell you how grateful I am, because I can't believe that we were thinking about moving her on. We really thought that we couldn't do anything for her, and just that blue chair has changed everything. She's put weight on, she goes around the home like a mother hen, helping everybody, and she's really enjoying her life now. And we thought that we couldn't do that for her. So, I mean, and again, it's a blue chair. There was another guy who he was crawling around on the floor, okay? And when staff tried to get him to stand up, he would lash out at them, okay? After attending the Material Citizenship training, they watched what he was doing. And what he was doing was he was picking bits up off the floor. So he was cleaning up, he was tidying up. So a member of staff identified this and got him a sweeping brush. And now he doesn't get down on his hands and knees. So he doesn't get down on his hands and knees, which they saw as a negative symptom of dementia. He doesn't lash out anymore because they're trying to, get him up off of the floor, which they were seeing as he's becoming aggressive because he has dementia. A sweeping brush removed that behaviour, okay? And I want to be very clear on, this kind of positive behaviour support. We have to be really careful that, again, we don't demonise people living with dementia, that it's their behaviour that's the problem. Actually, we need to look at, is it our behaviour that's the problem that's causing the distress reaction? And in this case, it certainly was. But they worked through that. There was also a woman who refused to get out of bed, and this was causing the care staff real problems because, one, heavily resourcing, staff had to keep going into a room trying to coax her to get out of bed. They were worried about her mental health. They were worried about her physical health. They were worried about her developing bed sores, but she refused to get out of bed. However, after Material Citizenship training, they identified that she really liked to bake bread. So they got her a bread maker, and that gave her a reason to get out of bed. And then she would bake bread for the rest of the home. So when we're looking at this from a psychological perspective, it also has a medical element in relation to that reduced her risk of developing bed sores, which is regulatory, is something that we have to do within, because it can be neglectful practice. Okay. So, but the fact that having a bread maker gave her a reason to get out of bed shows the importance of these objects, okay? And I hope you're starting to really get a sense of that in relation to what these are doing. And they're not the things that you would typically say, oh, that person would need that if they moved into a care home. There was also one guy who every day at 6 o'clock, he would go to the door and he would want to leave. And when he wasn't allowed to leave, he would smash the fire alarm. Now, this fire alarm in this care home went straight to the fire station. So the fire engine would then come out to the false alarm because there wasn't a fire. They were getting really annoyed with this, but clearly had to come out every time just in case it wasn't a false alarm. So after the Material Citizenship training, what one of the members of staff noticed was that he liked John Wayne videos. So around about 5:30, what he would do is he would put a John Wayne video on. And the guy would sit and he would watch the John Wayne videos. And it also, other men started to come and sit with him. And so it became quite a social thing. What they also noticed was that the one video wasn't enough. So what he would do is once that video had stopped, he'd get up, he'd get his coat and he'd go to leave again. So the member of staff made a plan so that, 5 minutes before or whatever the video was due to end, you put another one on. And actually having two meant that it removed him trying to leave the home and smashing the fire alarm. So, these are real, breakthroughs in a sense of what is problematic behaviour for staff, but also the distress reactions that it causes for people that, as I said right at the beginning, they're avoidable. So the impact on care staff, what they said was that management reported a real can-do attitude in the care home. They also said that Material Citizenship provided staff with a safety net. So this enabled them to weigh up the risk of physical risk and psychological risk. And also this safety net was, if inspectors come in or if anyone challenges what we are doing, why is that person doing that? We can say that we are following this approach and it's an evidence-based approach, and therefore we can. Okay. One manager said it had transformed how we work. Residents can eat when they choose rather than meal times, and they're enabled to do more of what they want to do. Staff began to notice the great work that they were doing. And this is what I'm talking about in inspiring care staff. They started to notice how good they were, and that has got to be good for any care profession, because if you feel good as a member of staff and you're confident and you are going to provide a much better level of care. I think Richard Branson once said something, like him or not, but, he said something in relation to, if you look after your staff will look after your customers. The same kind of applies. If we look after our staff by giving them good training that they can use, that makes sense to them, that's relevant to them, they can then get on with delivering the great care that they deliver. Staff were more confident in the way they worked with other members of staff, residents, relatives, and also external healthcare professionals. They were starting to find their voice. When our external healthcare professionals came in, they would say, actually, I think you should speak to the person, or actually, we know quite a lot about them, and this is what we need to do. So staff left feeling inspired, they felt valued, and they wanted more of this type of training. What they told me was they had done, dementia awareness training, which was typically largely about kind of biology, or it was about, top tips for challenging behaviour, but not, and also some of it was kind of from a different country or different things, and they didn't feel like it was relevant to their care home. So it's really important when we're developing, training for staff that they can relate to it, because otherwise why would they do it? And with Material Citizenship, it came from an academic setting, but then in order to develop the training, because I knew that this had legs, because I'd seen care practices change, what I did was I then worked with 2 care organisations and said, right, okay, let's develop this in a real setting and see how it works and get that feedback and develop it from there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to give you, because obviously staff can tell you much better about their experience than I can. So I'm just going to play you a video.
Attended the Material Citizenship training programme yesterday. I found it very beneficial and can't wait to put it into place in the care home. Even though that we think we're making the place as homely as can be, it definitely did highlight different areas that we need to improve on, which I'm excited to see happen.
I really enjoyed this course. It gave a great insight to lead into more person-centred care when doing care plans and things that people need for them in the care home, so I really enjoyed it.
I think it's very informative, and it does certainly put you in more of a person-centred care, learning about objects and having how important they are to other people.
I felt that the course was very informative. I have a different view now on aspects of care and person-centred care, and hopefully this can continue in the care home.
Absolutely amazing. It makes you realise that people aren't just walking with purpose, that there is a reason for it, and I think it'll be knowledgeable for every staff member.
Dr. Kellyn Lee, the training was amazing. It's the best I've been on in a long time, and it just showed that so small changes make such a big impact, and I cannot wait to see how our staff implement that in the care homes. So not just the residents with dementia, but also all of the residents.
news, and I've never come away as buzzing as I was yesterday from Kellyn's training.
So the Material Citizenship training programme, there's a leadership workshop, which this is really aimed at senior leadership teams, because it's important for them to buy into this practice. You know, it is different. It is about positive risk taking. And although I saw quite a few positive risk taking courses, what I also saw in my observations of people attending them was that they left saying, well, I'm not going to do that. So it really needs to be a buy-in from the whole organisation. There's Material Citizenship training, which is 2 half-day training programs, which are 4 weeks apart. The first is about the concept and kind of it's very interactive. So it's getting people to really think and do activities. And then they go away for 4 weeks, they put it into practice, and they bring their experiences back, and we work through those. There's also a train the trainer option, because what I understood in relation to the development of the training programme with care organisations was actually me going in and doing all of the training for care home staff. One, there's only one of me, so actually it isn't really feasible to do to train everybody, but also it could become quite expensive. So actually, if they trained their own trainers in-house, then if they had a high turnover of staff, they could include it in inductions, and they could actually do their own training with my support. And also I do some consultancy work and turnaround stuff in relation to, the way that the care home is operating, and, in relation to if there are some problems that people are finding challenging, then we can work together through a material citizenship perspective. So we've currently got locations. There's more than this now. We've got it in about 42, and that's in Scotland, in England, and in Wales. There are resources if you want to know more about material citizenship. There are some videos on YouTube, so hopefully you'll all have these details. There's videos on YouTube which are just animations, like 4.5 minutes long, and this really gives a perspective on what material citizenship is, and you feel free to share it with anybody you want to. It's really good. It's included in the training for care home staff. But there's also one for relatives as well. So if people are thinking about somebody moving into a care home, or people are thinking about moving into a care home themselves, you can watch this video, and it kind of, it brings home the kinds of objects that you may want to take in with you. We featured in The Guardian, which was, as famous for 5 seconds. So that was quite nice. And there's also publications. So there's a publication introducing material citizenship. We also featured in the World Alzheimer's Report last year, and we've got a new paper coming out this year which shows or gives some information in relation to the evaluation of the training itself. So that is it from me. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. My details are at the bottom as well, so you've got my email, the website, and also a telephone number. So if anybody wants to know any more, or is interested in any of the things that I've said, then absolutely feel free to get in contact. Thank you.